Hello again, juniors. Welcome back to our distance learning. This is week 18, and we are going to be covering both the 7th and the 10th commandments together in this video. Okay, 7th commandment, you shall not steal. Now we have a lot of objectives here, so bear with me. Number 1, explain the meaning of you shall not steal. Number 2, describe the concept of universal destination of goods. Number 3, determine whether it is moral to own private property. Number 4, name offenses against the 7th commandment. Number 5, explain the concept of commutative justice. Number 6, evaluate the morality or immorality of gambling. Number 7, describe our moral obligations towards creation. And number 8, explain the 7th commandment as it relates to Jesus' command of love of the poor. Okay, so respect for goods. The 7th commandment forbids unjustly taking or keeping the goods of one's neighbor and wronging him in any way with respect to his goods. It commands justice and charity in the care of earthly goods and the fruits of men's labor. And Christian life strives to order this world's goods to God and to fraternal charity. In other words, towards the common good. So most of everything that comes from the next several slides is going to harken back to these 3 points. Okay. The universal destination and the private ownership of goods. So universal destination. Universal means intended for everybody. Destination means where do they go or where they belong. So the universal destination of goods is really asking about what the greater purpose of the goods that we've been given is. And then, of course, we'll talk about private ownership. The goods of creation are destined for the whole human race. That's what it comes down to. However, the earth is divided up among men to assure the security of their lives, endangered by poverty and threatened by violence. So we'll go into a little bit more of that right here. The appropriation of property is legitimate for guaranteeing the freedom and dignity of persons and for helping each of them meet his basic needs and the needs of those in his charge. So it is okay to divide up what God has given us so that we have something for ourselves to ensure that our basic needs are met and the basic needs of those that we take care of. The right to private property, acquired or received in a just way, does not do away with the original gift of the earth to the whole of mankind. So in other words, it is okay for us to own private property, provided that we've earned it in a just way and we haven't hurt anyone in order to acquire it, and that it serves the common good. Because ultimately, if I have a home that I can raise my family in, that is going to serve the common good because my children will be well provided for, they can become productive members of society. The universal destination of good remains primordial, meaning existing from the beginning of time. So the right to ownership of private property can never contradict the basic need, the basic truth that all people are entitled to the goods of this earth. So that concept comes first, private property ownership comes second. Political authority has the right and the duty to regulate the legitimate exercise of the right to ownership for the sake of the common good. So it is up to the government to make sure that property is distributed fairly and evenly. I know that it doesn't always happen that way, but we do need somebody to regulate that sort of thing because it prevents the possibility of your neighbor just deciding that all of a sudden your house is their house. So yes, there do need to be laws in place for that. Okay, respect for persons and their goods. The 7th commandment forbids theft, which we describe as usurping another's property against the reasonable will of the owner. Other things forbidden by the 7th commandment include the deliberate retention of goods lent or of objects lost. So if you borrowed something from somebody and you refuse to return it, that is a violation of the 7th commandment. Also, if you lost something and you make no effort to replace it and you borrowed it from somebody, that is a sin against the commandment. Business fraud, paying an employee unjust wages, forcing up prices by taking advantage of the ignorance or hardship of another. Some of us are experiencing that right now. When this pandemic first started, people were going to grocery stores and buying up way too much stuff, and then some of those people were trying to sell it to other people at an enormous profit. I myself was trying to buy rubbing alcohol, and I was looking on Amazon because there was none in the grocery stores. And people are selling jars of regular rubbing alcohol, just a normal size jar, for $30 or more. Rubbing alcohol costs $2 at the grocery store. So that is a sin against the seventh commandment. Work poorly done. When you have an obligation to complete a task and you don't put in the proper amount of effort, you are stealing from somebody. You are stealing what is owed to them, in a sense. So, especially in the workplace, if you are being paid a salary to do a job and you don't do that job, of course, it would be wrong to accept the money for that job. Tax evasion. If you have to pay taxes, which of course you will eventually, and you don't pay them, that's a form of theft. It's theft of the state. And on the other side of that, when a government unjustly taxes its people at an exceedingly high rate, or it taxes them to the point where they can't provide for themselves, that is a form of theft. Forgery of checks and invoices, excessive expenses and waste, willfully damaging private or public property. All of these count as offenses against the seventh commandment. Okay. The concept of commutative justice. Contracts are subject to commutative justice, which regulates exchanges between persons and between institutions in accordance with a strict respect for their rights. So, in other words, commutative justice means that we acknowledge the basic rights of ownership of goods that exist among all people. So, we're all entitled to what God has given the world. Commutative justice means that fairness is given to that priority. It requires safeguarding property rights, paying debts, and fulfilling obligations freely contracted. So if I entered a contract of my own free will, I have to honor that contract. That is only fair. That's commutative justice. Without commutative justice, no other form of justice is possible. So down here, we're going to look at two other forms of justice, less important to our lesson, but still part of the catechism, so I wanted to include it. One distinguishes commutative justice from legal justice, which concerns what the citizen owes in fairness to the community, and from distributive justice, which regulates what the community owes its citizens in proportion to their contributions and needs. Gambling. Let's talk about gambling now. Games of chance or wagers are not in and of themselves contrary to justice. They only become morally unacceptable when they deprive someone of what is necessary to provide for his needs and those of others. So it's okay to gamble, it's okay to play those games and to make bets. But if it comes to the point where a person can no longer provide for their own needs or the needs of their children or whoever they have to take care of, that is an immoral choice. It can also become immoral when a person becomes enslaved to it. So when they become addicted, it becomes, unfair wagers and cheating at games always constitute grave matter, unless the damage inflicted is so small that the one who suffers it can't reasonably consider it a significant loss. So if we're talking about a very small amount of money, or even like a small, silly favor that they have to do, it's not really a problem. But do remember that if gambling deprives somebody of the ability to take care of themselves and their family, it is definitely an immoral choice. Okay, respect for the integrity of creation. Animals, like plants and inanimate beings, are by nature destined for the common good of past, present, and future humanity. So what that means is that our dominion over living creatures is not absolute. It has limitations. It's limited by the concern for the quality of life of our neighbor, including the generations to come. It requires a religious respect for the integrity of creation. In other words, yes, I am entitled to use the resources of the world, but my right to use those resources cannot usurp the future generations' right to enjoy them as well. I have to take care of the world. I can't cause it undue harm. I can't abuse the resources. I can't waste those resources, because they're not just for me. They're for the people that come after me. And the people who came before me left me with enough resources to provide for myself. So I have to do the same for the next generation. God entrusted the stewardship of animals to humans. Hence, it is legitimate to use them for food, clothing, and medical research when done for the common good. It is contrary to human dignity to cause animals to suffer or die needlessly. So we need to take care of them, we need to love them, and we need to make sure that when we use them, it is because it is a necessary part of serving the common good. It is likewise unworthy to spend money on them that should, as a priority, go to the relief of human misery. So here's a sticky situation. We love our pets, and sometimes they get sick. And if they get really sick and we take them to the vet and we learn that whatever medical care they need is going to cost a really big amount of money, we have to weigh that against our obligations to our families and to the people that are really suffering. If the money that we would spend on the care for that animal is money that should have gone to somebody else, then we've made the wrong choice. So if an operation is so expensive that it's going to cause your family some serious hardship, then it's the wrong choice to pay for that medical care for that animal. So I know that sounds harsh and unkind even, but remember, human beings are the summit of God's creation. Human beings are the ones that are entitled to our love and our care, more so than the animals. We are the highest point of God's creation, and so we have to give to humans before we give to animals. So that leads to the last point. One can love animals, but one should not direct to them the affection due only to persons. And love for the poor. It is by what they have done for the poor that Jesus Christ will recognize his chosen ones. In other words, we are going to be judged based on how we obeyed Jesus' command to love and serve the poor. Love for the poor is incompatible with immoderate love of riches or their selfish use. We can't both love the poor and spend our heart's desires on the riches of this world. Here's a nice quote here. Not to enable the poor to share in our goods is to steal from them and deprive them of life. The goods we possess are not ours, but theirs. The demands of justice must be satisfied first of all. That which is already due in justice is not to be offered as a gift of charity. That's St. John Chrysostom. In other words, when we give to the poor, that's not an act of sympathy. It may have been motivated by sympathy, but we're not doing them a favor. We're serving justice. Remember, justice means fairness. God created enough resources for the entire world. So when we are giving to the poor, we are simply sharing with them what they should already have been given. That's not to say that everybody's poor for the same reasons. Some people make really bad choices. But the fact is that everybody deserves to be fed and cared for. So, last point, probably the most important one here. Those who are oppressed by poverty are the object of a preferential love on the part of the church. Remember that term, preferential love. It means they get first dibs. They're in the most need. It's have you ever heard this might sound kind of mean. Have you heard the expression the squeaky wheel gets the grease? Well, in this case, you're going to go fix the thing that has the problem. So the poor are given preference when it comes to our time, our love, and the efforts of the church, because that is who Jesus would go to first. So now, let's go straight into the 10th commandment, which is you shall not covet your neighbor's goods. So I hope you can already naturally see a connection between the 7th and 10th commandment. 7th commandment is what are our duties and obligations towards the ownership of goods and the other's ownership of goods. Now we're talking about our desires. Okay, objectives. Explain the meaning of you shall not covet your neighbor's goods. 2, summarize the root of covetousness. 3, name offenses against the 10th commandment. And number 4, determine why detachment from material goods is important. The 10th commandment unfolds and completes the 9th, which is concerned with concupiscence of the flesh. Remember, in our last last video, we talked about the 3 types of concupiscence or lust. One of those was the concupiscence of the flesh, and that deals with the 6th and 9th commandments. But today, we're focusing on lust of the eyes. Let me get to the second bullet point before I jump in there. The 10th commandment forbids coveting the goods of another as the root of theft, robbery, and fraud, which the 7th command forbids. Lust of the eyes leads to the violence and injustice forbidden by the 5th commandment. So in other words, lust of the eyes can lead us to violence. Lust of the eyes is the desire you get when you see something you really want. And remember, lust is an inordinate desire. So it's when you want something too much, or maybe you even want something that's bad for you. The 10th commandment concerns the intentions of the heart. With the ninth, it summarizes all the precepts of the law. So it's really about the intentions of our hearts. The disorder of covetous desires. The 10th commandment forbids greed and the desire to amass earthly goods without limit. It is okay to want things. It is okay to enjoy nice things. But when you want things to an unlimited extent, when you want it all, when it's never enough, then there's a problem with the desires in your heart. The 10th commandment forbids avarice arising from a passion for riches and their attendant power. Sometimes our desire for things is motivated by a desire for power. If we want money because we know that we'll be able to assert influence over people, that can be a harmful thing. And I'm not talking about a positive influence where you can change the world for the better. I'm talking about being able to have certain things done for you, or just an inordinate power. It also forbids the desire to commit injustice by harming our neighbor in his temporal goods. In other words, when you want to hurt somebody because they have what you don't, not a good thing. Our thirst for another's goods is immense, infinite, and never quenched. Thus it is written, "He who loves money never has money enough." And that comes from the Roman Catechism. I think that's so interesting. It's true. If you know what it feels like to have a little money in your hand sometimes, it can really go to your head. You're like, wow, okay, I'm going to buy this. And then all of a sudden mentally you've spent all that money and you need more. If somebody gives you more money than you've had in a while, sometimes even though it's more money than we've ever had, it's not enough because we make all these plans to do things with this money. It is not a violation of this commandment to desire to obtain things that belong to one's neighbor, provided this is done by just means. So if your neighbor gets a new car and you're like, wow, that's a really nice car, I want one of those, but you go and get a job and you earn the money to get that car, that's fine. That's a good thing. Envy is a capital sin. We've talked about envy before. It refers to the sadness at the sight of another's good and the immoderate desire to acquire them for oneself, even unjustly. So remember, envy is a form of sadness. It's sadness at another's success or another's wealth or another's property. When it wishes grave harm to a neighbor, it is a mortal sin. St. Augustine saw envy as the diabolical sin, for from envy are born hatred, detraction, calumny, joy caused by the misfortune of a neighbor, and displeasure caused by his prosperity. So remember, detraction is when you reveal secrets about someone to somebody who shouldn't know them, and calumny is when you start lying or gossiping about someone. And St. Augustine saw envy as the root of all of these problems. All right, so now let's end on a positive note here. In the same way, every one of you who does not renounce all his possessions cannot be my disciple. This is Jesus' warning to us that if we are attached to the things of this world, we're incapable of following him. We're incapable of making it into heaven. The precept of detachment from riches is obligatory for entrance into heaven. So it's a requirement. We have to let go of our desire, of our need, our internal need to have and acquire things. Christians are called to direct their affections rightly. That comes from a document called Lumen Gentium. To direct our affections rightly means that we want the right things. We want good things. We want things that'll last. We're storing up treasure in heaven. That's a passage from Matthew's gospel. We're not focusing on things that can decay and die over time. Desire for true happiness frees man from his immoderate detachment to the goods of this world so that he can find his fulfillment in the vision and beatitude of God. That's it right there. That's the point. Look at it again and reflect on it, pray on it. Desire for true happiness frees us from immoderate attachment to the goods of this world so we can find fulfillment in the vision and beatitude of God. It might sound cliche. You may have heard something worded similarly to this many times over, but desired attachment to goods will pull you away from God. It will keep you from finding him, from being able to see him face to face. St. Gregory summarized it beautifully. He said, I want to see God. That expresses the true desire of man. Well, congratulations, guys. You have made it to the very end of the 10 Commandments. You've done a lot of great work here. I hope that some of these lessons will stay on your heart for a really long time. And again, I'm very proud of you. Great job. I will see you guys later this week. Bye.